Thank you, guys. Good morning. Fox News alert now. New developments out of London. British police ID a third London attacker seen here on the right. 22 years old, believed to be an Italian national of Moroccan descent. We also know one of the killers was featured in a documentary called The Jihadi Next Door, raising the question how these men could slip through their fingers so easily. We are looking at that question inside of America's Newsroom today. First, though, big day ahead for Republicans and President Trump. He and the Vice President, Mike Pence, will be meeting with lawmakers to try and get the gears of Congress cranking up again on their domestic agenda. Remember that? Wow. I'm Bill Hemmer. Welcome here to America's Newsroom. Big 2 hours ahead. How you doing, Shannon?
A lot of plates to keep spinning.
Yes,
but we're going to do it today. I'm Shannon Bream. In need of a big legislative win, the president will meet with Republican congressional leaders this afternoon to talk health care and tax reform as the Senate hits crunch time on passing a bill to repeal Obamacare.
In the meantime, a lot of Washington looking ahead to Thursday in the testimony of the fired FBI Director James Comey when he sits down in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee.
All right, big day and week ahead in Washington. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins us now live from the North Lawn. Good morning, John.
Shannon, good morning to you. And that bicameral meeting with House and Senate Republican leaders this afternoon, 3 o'clock in the Roosevelt Room here in the White House. The president making a big push to get his legislative agenda back on track. He was on message on Twitter this morning. Well, at least for 55 minutes. The first tweet of the day, the president saying, quote, big meeting today with Republican leadership concerning tax cuts and health care. We are all pushing hard, must get it right. The president and his legislative shop are making a big push on health care and tax reform. His legislative director, Mark Short, walking us through it last night. The immediate goal is to get Obamacare repeal and replace moving in the Senate. Mitch McConnell says that he's aiming for a vote sometime in late June. Hoping to get it through the conference process, the White House is, and put a bill on the president's desk before the August recess, or at least slamming up against the August recess. They're also getting the House and Senate ramped up for tax reform. Mark Short says they hope to have language on a bill by Labor Day, then get it all done sometime in the fall. Unlike health care, which they know won't attract any Democratic support, they are hoping to get some support for tax reform, reaching out particularly to blue dog Democrats who tend to be more on the conservative side to get on board with tax reform. One interesting point that Short made last night when he was briefing us is that while they would like to get a deficit-neutral tax reform bill passed, he says the prime focus, the most important goal, is to get tax cuts done so that they can spur businesses and get the economy growing. So it may be that they throw out the idea of overall tax reform just to go for tax cuts. One of the potential stumbling blocks here that many Republicans are worried about is the fact that the president seems to keep going off script, off message with his tweets as he did yesterday. And as I said, he was on message for 55 minutes this morning, and then he tweeted this out, quote, the fake mainstream media is working so hard trying to get me not to use social media. They hate that I can get the honest and unfiltered message out. Truth be told, though, there are a lot of Republicans in this town would like to see maybe a little more filtering going on when it comes to the president's tweets. Shannon?
Yeah, I believe the call was for a little less drama from down the street at Pennsylvania Avenue. In the meantime, the White House is staying quiet on this whole Russia investigation, but the former FBI director is going to be talking on Thursday.
He will be, and the White House yesterday made a lot of news. Sarah Huckabee Sanders in the briefing when she opened it up saying that the White House would not exert or invoke at least executive privilege when it comes to James Comey's testimony. They will not stand in the way of him going before the Senate Intelligence Committee. Experts I talked to said that they might have a case to invoke executive privilege, saying that the conversations between James Comey and the president likely were covered, even though Comey is no longer a federal employee, though it may have been hard on the merits of that case to make it and assert executive privilege in this particular case. One of the big questions, though, when it comes to his testimony is just how much will James Comey be able to say in public? He has had conversations with Robert Mueller, who is the special counsel assigned to the Russia investigation. They're called deconfliction, wanting to make sure that whatever Comey says in testimony to the Senate Intelligence Committee does not conflict with the investigation that Robert Mueller has ongoing. So, Shannon, some question, I think, is to just how much fireworks we'll see on Thursday.
Yeah, there's going to have to be a narrowing or a focus on that. All right, John Roberts, live at the White House. Thank you.
That is a foundation. Plenty to talk about now with Byron York, chief political correspondent, Washington Examiner, Fox News contributor, Atlanta, Georgia today. Byron, good day to you and good morning.
Good morning, Bill.
The Trump sons are pushing a new business idea. And it coincides this week with Comey's testimony. And, of course, when they're doing interviews, they're asked about it. And this is what they said a bit earlier today.
It's the greatest hoax of all time. I was there throughout the campaign. We have no dealings in Russia. We have no projects in Russia. We have nothing to do with Russia.
I mean, to me, it's without a question, reads and smells like a witch hunt.
His family has always been his biggest defenders, and again, they are today. What do you make of that, knowing that Comey will not be blocked on Thursday?
Well, Comey Day on Thursday has kind of turned into Comey Week, with just kind of a media frenzy already going about this. So it's not surprising to see some pre-pushback from the White House. And they're really going to the very core question of all this, which is the question of whether Donald Trump or any of his associates colluded with the Russians to try to influence the 2016 election. And they're saying there's nothing there. And by the way, a lot of people who know a lot about the investigation have said they have not seen evidence of that so far. So that's the core question. But remember, there are lots of other questions about, what was Michael Flynn doing? What was Paul Manafort doing? What were other people in the Trump camp doing? So there's clearly going to be a lot to talk about. But the White House is probably smart to start pushing back before it happens.
All right, let's talk about what's happening today. Republicans going to the White House, and Mike Pence said this just yesterday about health care and reform and what they do with Obamacare. This has been contested for some time, a considerable amount of time that some would argue, and now the vice president said the following. Watch.
We're not going to rest until we repeal and replace Obamacare with the kind of health care reform the American people deserve.
So this now goes to the forefront, Byron, at a time when the clock is running. Go.
Time is short. After today, there are only 30 days left on the House calendar before the August recess. To make it happen, the Senate would need to pass something this month before the July 4th recess, and then they'd have to take what they have in July to put the two bills together and pass them. I spoke to one senator this morning who simply said that was optimistic. It's a very optimistic schedule, and if they don't get it done by the August recess, you're into September. And remember that spending bill they passed that would avoid a shutdown and fund the government through September 30th? Well, September 30th isn't that far away. They've got to get appropriations bills going. And, of course, they all really want to get to tax reform on the Republican side. So these things are stacking up really fast. And these next few weeks are critical.
Sorry for the interruption. Did that senator put odds on it passing? Is it 50-50, greater or less, do you think?
No, the senator believes there will be a serious bill that is not some sort of ceremonial bill that they can put up for a vote and then it will fail and then they can all go say they tried. It'll be a serious bill that they tried to pass the Senate with at least 50 votes plus Vice President Pence's vote. So no odds on it, but they have to make a serious effort. They can't be seen as just kind of blowing this off after having talked about it for 7 years.
We're watching here. Thank you, Byron. Byron York there in Atlanta. Big vote there in 14 days. Special election. I know that's why you're there. Thank you, Byron. Shannon.
All right, they said they would fight to catch the leakers, and now the Department of Justice has charged a 25-year-old federal contractor with espionage. They say she leaked a classified report to the press. Reality Winner was arrested and charged over the weekend. The news came just after an online news site published a classified report on alleged Russian hacking. Now, we're working to confirm whether her arrest is directly connected to that specific story. Winner served in the Air Force and has spoken out against President Trump's policies on social media while showing support for statements made by Bernie Sanders. GOP lawmakers say recent high-profile leaks should be taken very seriously.
I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter what administration. When you have classified information, you cannot put that out there just because you think it would be a good idea. I want people in handcuffs, and I want to see people behind bars.
Coming up in the next hour of America's Newsroom, we're going to have a live report from Washington on Winner's arrest and that top secret
What a name,
report.
huh? Reality Winner? Where do you come up with that? Apparently, the leaker went to a newspaper or a publisher, and the publisher went to the FBI and said, is this true or not? And that's when the FBI had the fingerprints and the investigation went forward from there. So a lot more to learn about this as we go forward.
That sworn affidavit is very interesting with how this all played out. And just by a crease that appeared in the paper, they could tell that it had been physically handled and copied and scanned. And they say that led them to her.
Wow. 10 minutes past the hour. Meanwhile, Rex Tillerson now saying the Middle East needs to come together and find a solution to terror threats out of Qatar. Watch.
We're hopeful that the parties can resolve this through dialogue, and we encourage that they do sit together and find a way to resolve whatever the differences are that have led to this decision.
This is growing by the day. Did the president's big speech in Saudi Arabia give the Gulf states the courage to cut off ties to terror? It could be possible diplomatic crisis for the U.S., but the former U.S. Ambassador John Bolton with his take on all this and what we need to understand. That's coming up next.
And breaking news in the fight against ISIS as U.S.-backed forces take aim at crushing a key stronghold in the fight to wipe out those terrorists. The developing details, we're just getting them in. We'll bring them to you in minutes.
Also from the White House, President Donald Trump doubling down on his demands for a travel ban. But is the social media habit hurting him in the courts? What do you think? Fair and balanced debate on that momentarily.
Social media for the president is extremely important. It gives him the ability to speak directly to the people without the bias of the media filtering those types of communications.
U.S.-backed forces, Syrian forces, launching a major assault on the ISIS-held city of Raqqa. The northern city was one of the first Syrian towns captured by ISIS way back in January 2014. It has been used as the capital city for the Islamic State. The offensive against Raqqa coming after months of preparation by the U.S.-led coalition of Kurdish and Syrian fighters. U.S. commanders saying the effort to reclaim the city could be long and deadly, but could also be a major turning point in the battle against ISIS.
Can't come quick enough. Watch that story. Meanwhile, U.S. leaders urging Saudi Arabia and 6 other Arab countries to resolve their differences with Qatar. Those countries cut ties over the week, saying the Qatari government has supported terrorism. President Trump tweeting this about the move earlier today. During my recent trip to the Middle East, I stated that there can no longer be funding of radical ideology. Leaders pointed to Qatar. Look. Exclamation point. John Bolton, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Fox News contributor, senior fellow American Enterprise Institute, and good day to you. A lot to go through here quickly. Just give us a sense strategically, why is this so important?
Well, there has been a split within the Gulf Cooperation Council, the 6 oil-producing monarchies on the Arabian Peninsula, on a number of key strategic issues for some time. This is the strongest step that the Saudis have taken to date against one of the kind of dissenting members, Qatar in this case. And I think it has to do not only with Qatar's funding of terrorists like the Muslim Brotherhood and ISIS, Hamas, but also their policy vis-a-vis Iran and the nuclear weapons program. Well, they share a big natural gas field with Iran. They've been, of the GCC members, probably the most open to dealing with Tehran and most supportive of the Tehran regime's nuclear efforts. So this is something that has bothered the other Arab states on the peninsula, bothered the Egyptians, and I think the decisive step of cutting off air and sea traffic, land traffic across the Saudi border is a pretty strong signal from the other GCC members.
President Trump is taking partly credit for this, as I just mentioned a moment ago. Charles Krauthammer characterized it this way last night.
This, I think, is Egypt and Saudi Arabia acting together, saying, we now have an umbrella of American protection, a president who supports us. We're going to have to end this game. And the way to end it is to say to the Qataris, you are not free agents. Qatar was playing both sides, and it has to declare itself.
I think the key phrase in what he said, an umbrella of American protection, match that with the tweet from earlier today. Is there truth to this, that the president urged them or gave them the cover to go forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think this discussion between the president and top Saudi and other Arab officials during his visit could have been key. Which was the chicken and which was the egg? Who knows? It may have been the Saudis saying, we're prepared to do this. Will you back us? And he said yes. Whatever the sequence, I think it's in play now. And I think this is something where any effort to cut off funding, whether by governments or by private individuals in the Gulf Arab countries, cut off funding for terrorist activities, reduce their support or their cooperation with Iran. Very important for Israel and the United States.
We have a significant air base there, too. We fly B-52s out of there. Bob Gates, former defense secretary, said this about that.
Qatar is the only country in the region that allows us to land B-52s. Transitioning away from there would be expensive, and it would be very complicated operationally. And you run the risk if you say, okay, well, we're going to shut down part of Al Udeid. You run the risk the Qatari government basically says, okay, then why don't you just get the hell out altogether?
Would that happen?
I think it's unlikely, but I think what this says is the United States on this issue should be silent publicly and work behind the scenes, but to help advance what the Saudis are trying to do.
Let's talk about Samantha Power, former U.S. ambassador to the UN. You were one in a previous lifetime as well. When this issue comes up in front of James Comey on Thursday, why is the question about why she requested the unmasking of American names potentially so important, if indeed it happened?
Well, it's rare to ask for a name to be unmasked in an intelligence report, and you have to have a good reason for it. And if it is a good reason, it's normally approved. But if it's for a political purpose, that is completely illegitimate. Now, she wouldn't ask NSA to unmask a name for a political purpose. It would be for something else. There are very good records of these requests and what action was taken. And if in her case or Susan Rice's case or anybody else's case, there's a political pattern here, that is a serious abuse of power.
Did you ever ask for the unmasking of a name when you were in that position?
Not when I was UN ambassador, but when I was Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security, I did on intelligence pieces dealing with proliferation that I thought were important. I did it a whopping 10 times in 4 years. And for Joe Biden and Chris Dodd and John Kerry, it was a big issue in my confirmation hearing. Let's see if they think it's a big issue now.
Final point, you said political. Did you ever do it for political reasons?
No, and I said in my confirmation hearing I'd be happy to have the intercepts in question and the names put on the public record.
Wow. John Bolton, thank you.
Thank you.
Come back in 2 days, okay? Shannon, what is next here, 20 past?
Well, as you just mentioned, one of the biggest issues on this Qatar issue because it hosts U.S. military assets in the war on terror. So a member of Israel's parliament will join us and weigh in. Michael Oren.
Also, we now know 2 of the terrorists previously known to police and MI5. Is enough being done to stop the attacks that we've now seen in England 3 times in 3 months as we get the identity today of that 3rd killer?
Police, they're asking community to help. When someone gives us some kind of information, it's just taken and check away.
British police now identifying all 3 attackers responsible for the carnage in London. 22-year-old Youssef Zagba, identified earlier this morning, believed to be an Italian national of Moroccan descent. Italian media claims he was stopped there while heading to Syria last year, and that Italian intelligence informed British authorities. He was reportedly charged at one point with international terrorism, but that was dropped. Karam Shahzad Butt, age 27, born in Pakistan, known to the police and MI5. Authorities say that there was no intelligence suggesting that the London attack was being planned. He appeared in a local news documentary titled The Jihadis Next Door and was seen praying near a black ISIS flag with a group of radical Muslims. Finally, Rashid Redouane, a 30-year-old who claimed to be Moroccan and Libyan, was from Barking, a neighborhood in East London. He was also on police and MI5 radar. Andrew Peak joins me now, former U.S. Army intelligence officer. Andrew, good to see you again. When we last talked on Sunday, we didn't have all these details about these 3, but now it seems like for at least 2 of them, there were interactions with authorities who had legitimate concerns about them.
That's exactly right, and a couple of things jump out at me. One is that the deportation laws in the UK are horribly broken. You know, this Moroccan-Italian suspect, only about a dozen people in Britain have been deported over the past 10 years. So it points to, for me, a real inability for the authorities to when they get a terrorism suspect, to send him back to Italy or Morocco or wherever.
Did you say a dozen in 10 years?
A dozen in 10 years. That's from 2005 to 2015, the last data we have. which is a real hole in their security, frankly.
That's a shocking number. Now, you know the conversation that we're having here on this side of the pond, and that people say it's not compassionate, it is uncaring and bigoted to want restrictions, to want deportations, to want to be more tightly controlled about our border. How do we have that conversation while also acknowledging the realities about security issues?
Right. Well, I think it's actually much easier for us than it is for the UK. We have a smaller Muslim population from which terrorist recruits from ISIS can be drawn. I think we have a stronger political culture that is willing to talk about issues of national identity much more than the British are. But what the British don't need, where I think Theresa May really went off the rails last time when she made her statement on Sunday, was the call for new laws. Britain has passed a new counterterrorism law about every 2 years for the past 15 years. The police have all the authority they need. What they need at the political level is just the will to carry out some of these actions. It's preposterous that Anjem Choudary, the most notorious radical imam in Britain, is only jailed a decade after he first calls for violence and 15 years after he's linked to 9/11. That's preposterous, and that speaks to a lack of political will.
Well, and one of the friends of one of these three suspects said at one point that he became concerned because his friend was watching these YouTube videos all the time, that he was being radicalized, that he reported that to authorities, and yet nothing happened. I mean, we know they have thousands of cases, impossible to track every thread, but that seems like a direct report.
That's exactly right. I mean, the Labour opposition to the Tories who are competing in the election coming up here very shortly would say that the Tories, this is a direct result of the Tories cutting police by 20% during the 6 years Theresa May was Home Secretary. However, that's kind of a misnomer. The real core here is MI5 and MI6, who have about 12 to 13,000 personnel. And the issue there is that just has to be increased. They simply have to have more officers. And they have to increase counterterrorism funding because, as you say, there's 3,000 open investigations. They simply have to follow up on each and then summon the political will to send the people home or put them in jail as needed.
An interesting comment, several of them actually, by Dr. James Mitchell yesterday on Fox, talking about, of course, he was the one who interrogated the 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and he talked about how political correctness is going to be used against the Western world, and that KSM basically told him that they were counting on that people don't want to be viewed around the world as being, bigoted or discriminatory, and they also, when people are tracked down, that they will be able to push back and say, hey, if you want to take a look at my community or my mosque, this is my religious freedom. And so that they know how to use our freedoms against us in the Western world.
No, that's precisely right. And you saw in the video A Jihadist Next Door that has aired several times on Fox, that how dicey this is at the street level. You have the police doing the right thing, saying, hey, we're following up on a complaint. You were showing an ISIS flag and praying around it. We're going to detain you for the purpose of a search. And immediately, the suspected terrorist in this attack starts claiming racial discrimination. And if you're an average beat cop, that's really dangerous because the best case is you find something on these guys and the case goes upstairs. But much more likely, you're going to get a complaint for racial discrimination in your promotion file. And frankly, administratively, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, very tough call for our men and women who are on the front lines every single day. Andrew P., good to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon.
So now we're learning the sons of President Donald Trump are about to launch a whole new venture, what they're up to, that might be coming to a town near you very soon. Also, will Thursday's hearing put to rest talk of Russia unmasking and Comey's dismissal? What we expect to learn with Jay Sekulow minutes away.
You're not going to win the investigation regarding James Comey in the press. You're not going to win it. You're going to win it with really great lawyering, really sober lawyering, but you're not going to win that through tweeting.
British police now identifying all three attackers responsible for the carnage in London. 22-year-old Youssef Zagba, identified earlier this morning, believed to be an Italian national of Moroccan descent. Italian media claims he was stopped there while heading to Syria last year, and that Italian intelligence informed British authorities. He was reportedly charged at one point with international terrorism, but that was dropped. Karam Shahzad Butt, age 27, born in Pakistan, known to the police and MI5. Authorities say that there was no intelligence suggesting that the London attack was being planned. He appeared in a local news documentary titled The Jihadis Next Door and was seen praying near a black ISIS flag with a group of radical Muslims. Finally, Rashid Redouane, a 30-year-old who claimed to be Moroccan and Libyan, was from Barking, a neighborhood in East London. He was also on police and MI5 radar. Andrew Peak joins me now, former U.S. Army intelligence officer. Andrew, good to see you again. When we last talked on Sunday, we didn't have all these details about these three, but now it seems like for at least two of them, there were interactions with authorities who had legitimate concerns about them.
That's exactly right, and a couple of things jump out at me. One is that the deportation laws in the UK are horribly broken. You know, this Moroccan-Italian suspect, only about a dozen people in Britain have been deported over the past 10 years. So it points to, for me, a real inability for the authorities to when they get a terrorism suspect, to send them back to Italy or Morocco or wherever.
Did you say a dozen in 10 years?
A dozen in 10 years. That's from 2005 to 2015, the last data we have, which is a real hole in their security, frankly.
That's a shocking number. Now, you know the conversation that we're having here on this side of the pond, and that people say it's not compassionate, it is uncaring and bigoted to want restrictions, to want deportations, to want to be more tightly controlled about our border. How do we have that conversation while also acknowledging the realities about security issues?
Right. Well, I think it's actually much easier for us than it is for the UK. You know, we have a smaller Muslim population from which terrorist recruits from ISIS can be drawn. I think we have a stronger political culture that is willing to talk about issues of national identity much more than the British are. But what the British don't need, where I think Theresa May really went off the rails last time when she made her statement on Sunday, was the call for new laws. You know, Britain has passed a new counterterrorism law about every 2 years for the past 15 years. The police have all the authority they need. What they need at the political level is just the will to carry out some of these actions. It's preposterous that Anjem Choudary, the most notorious radical imam in Britain, is only jailed a decade after he first calls for violence and his first linked, and 15 years after he's linked to 9/11. That's preposterous, and that speaks to a lack of political will.
Well, and one of the friends of one of these three suspects said at one point that he became concerned because his friend was watching these YouTube videos all the time, that he was being radicalized, that he reported that to authorities, and yet nothing happened. I mean, we know they have thousands of cases, impossible to track every thread, but that seems like a direct report.
That's exactly right. I mean, the Labour opposition to the Tories, who are competing in the election coming up here very shortly, would say that the Tories, this is a direct result of the Tories cutting police by 20% during the 6 years Theresa May was Home Secretary. However, that's kind of a misnomer. The real core here is MI5 and MI6, who have about 12 to 13,000 personnel. And the issue there is that just has to be increased. They simply have to have more officers. And they have to increase counterterrorism funding because, as you say, there's 3,000 open investigations. They simply have to follow up on each and then summon the political will to send the people home or put them in jail as needed.
An interesting comment, several of them actually, by Dr. James Mitchell yesterday on Fox, talking about, of course, he was the one who interrogated the 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and he talked about how political correctness is going to be used against the Western world, and that KSM basically told him that they were counting on that people don't want to be viewed around the world as being, bigoted or discriminatory, and they also, when people are tracked down, that they will be able to push back and say, hey, if you want to take a look at my community or my mosque, this is my religious freedom. And so that they know how to use our freedoms against us in the Western world.
No, that's precisely right. And you saw in the video, A Jihadist Next Door, that aired, as aired several times on Fox, that how dicey this is at the street level. You have the police doing the right thing, saying, hey, we're following up on a complaint. You were showing an ISIS flag and praying around it. We're going to detain you for the purpose of a search. And immediately, the suspected terrorist in this attack starts claiming racial discrimination. And if you're an average beat cop, that's really dangerous because the best case is you find something on these guys and the case goes upstairs. But much more likely, you're going to get a complaint for racial discrimination in your promotion file. And frankly, administratively, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, very tough call for our men and women who are on the front lines every single day. Andrew Peak, good to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon.
So now we're learning the sons of President Donald Trump are about to launch a whole new venture. What they're up to that might be coming to a town near you very soon. Also, will Thursday's hearing put to rest talk of Russia unmasking and Comey's dismissal? What we expect to learn with Jay Sekulow minutes away.
You're not going to win the investigation regarding James Comey in the press. You're not going to win it. You're going to win it with really great lawyering, really sober lawyering, but you're not going to win that through tweeting.
Russian leaders claiming one of the country's jet fighters has intercepted an American bomber over the Baltic Sea. Russian radar apparently spotting an aircraft flying along the border of Russian airspace realized it was a U.S. B-52 strategic bomber. Now, Russia says the fighter jet escorted the U.S. bomber until it was further from its border. Now, twice last year, Russian jets, U.S. planes came within feet of each other near Russian airspace. That's pretty close when you're flying. No word from U.S. military officials yet on that.
The president's power to exert executive privilege is very well established. However, in order to facilitate a swift and thorough examination of the facts sought by the Senate Intelligence Committee, President Trump will not assert executive privilege regarding James Comey's scheduled testimony.
So the White House says it will not get in the way of former FBI Director James Comey and his testimony to the Senate Intelligence Committee on Thursday. A lot of folks say they couldn't have. Well, Comey has already talked about the hearing with Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Just how much will he be able to reveal publicly? Jay Sekulow is Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice. Good morning, Jay.
Hey, Shannon.
Okay, so we know they've already had some conversations. Here's what Judge Napolitano, another one of our legal eagles around here, had to say about how this may work.
The last thing a prosecutor wants is a potential star witness in another environment under oath testifying where the prosecutor's not there. So that tells me that Bob Mueller knows what Jim Comey is going to say and has approved what Jim Comey is going to say, meaning whatever he says is not going to jeopardize any of the investigations that Mueller is running.
Jay, how much could that limit what we actually get to hear from the former FBI director?
Well, it can limit it significantly. I mean, James Comey is testifying now as the former FBI director, so he's testifying as a witness. I mean, I find it troubling, frankly, that that the special counsel is letting James Comey testify at all. Because if he's a witness that he's using in an investigation, why in the world would you put your witness up to be examined? And James Comey, let's face it, is not exactly the most credible witness. This is a guy that had to correct his testimony before the United States House and Senate on 3 separate occasions. One of them was a very significant statement. He talked about tens of thousands of emails going from Huma Abedin's computer to Anthony Weiner's, only to find out, and this was during the election, only to find out it was less than a dozen. So he's not a credible witness, and he's discussing his testimony with the special counsel. I think this points to what we're going to see on Thursday, which is probably basically not much. I don't think there's going to be a lot he's going to be able to say, and James Comey's better be very careful on what he says, Shannon. Let me emphasize one last thing here. 18 U.S.C. 4 says, if you know of a crime being committed and you're a federal agent, and you do not report that to the authorities, which means for James Comey to walk across the street to the Department of Justice, you're committing a crime. So the fact is, if he felt he was being, there was an obstruction of justice, he had an obligation to formally report that. He did not. Case closed.
Yeah, and there are a lot of folks who say that's going to be one of the #1 questions that GOP senators have for him when he takes that seat on Thursday. Now, let me ask you about this. The FBI has declined to turn over any so-called Comey memos, if they exist.
Right.
They have been, reported through basically anonymous sources to this point. Current House Oversight Committee Chair Jason Chaffetz says he does think that Congress should be able to get to those because he considers them federal documents if they exist. What say you?
Well, I mean, they are federal documents if they exist. And, I mean, James Comey didn't have any problem with his staff leaking it to the New York Times. And, by the way, how did the staff get their hands on his private memos? I mean, I like to ask that fundamental question. How in the world did James Comey, then the FBI director, do a private memorandum, got it to his staff, and allowed that staff to leak it to a newspaper? I mean, I think that while he's testifying and discussing his testimony with the special counsel, what doesn't look right here? Everything looks wrong. That's the truth. This whole thing is a setup. I'm afraid to say that the memo would be self-serving at best, may not exist at worst. But what they're doing is trying to paint a picture here. And the left better be very, very careful, because if I was on that committee, I would bear down on James Comey and I'd ask him first, you are under oath again, former Director Comey. 3 times you've had to correct your testimony. By the way, if you and I had to do that, we could be facing jail.
Yeah, we would. I don't want to have to think about that.
Tell the truth.
Well, and, okay, so he's already been before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and during that time, there was an interchange that people have made a lot of note of. The fact that when he was pressed on whether someone had tried to interfere with him in this investigation, he'd said no. Now, some say he was only referring to the Justice Department. Others say, sounded more broadly, like that was an opening for him to say if he felt he was being pressured by anyone at any point with regard to this investigation. Do you think he'll be able to explain that away?
Well, he's going to have to try to explain it away, but I'll tell you this. If even what the president said was true, it would be a big bag of nothing. That is not obstruction of justice. That's not by threat or coercion. That's not, I mean, that doesn't rise to the high level of obstruction of justice. But I go back to what I said at the beginning. If James Comey really thought there was an obstruction case to be made, he had an obligation, not should have. He had an obligation to report that to the Department of Justice. He didn't do it. That's it. Case is closed right there. So, you know, he could testify. He better be very careful, by the way. He's under oath again. And maybe they'll give him another chance to correct his incorrect testimony if he does that. But he better be very careful on what he says here.
We know that you, along with us and all of our viewers, will be watching every nuance very carefully on Thursday. Jay Sekulow, thank you.
Wow.
Nice moment in Texas. House Speaker Paul Ryan, former President George W. Bush, visiting the Adaptive Training Foundation in Dallas. That's a nonprofit founded by a former NFL player, David Vobora, he said. Its goal is to help former athletes and military members who have lost a limb or suffer the effects of other injuries. Ryan called that visit an incredibly humbling experience.
Nothing like that.
Shots. Nice moment.
To put things in perspective, right? Any complaint that you have about your day, looking at those heroes and what they're experiencing?
Enormous sacrifice. And I mean, when those guys walk in, it's like, hey, let's have a great time. So nice to see.
Well, President Trump not backing down from his belief that a travel ban, his words, is absolutely necessary right now here in the U.S.
I don't think the president cares what you call it, whether you call it a ban, whether you call it a restriction. Everybody wants to get into the labels and the semantics of it, but the bottom line is he's trying to protect the citizens of this country.
How President Trump is firing back at critics of the policy and what he's asking the Department of Justice to do about it now.
Also, Trump team said it would go after the leakers, and now they apparently have one. 25-year-old federal contractor charged under the Espionage Act will ask a former DOJ official about the consequences if found guilty.
It is a priority. We've already begun to step up our efforts, and whenever a case can be made, we will seek to put some people in jail.
Yesterday's deadly shooting in Orlando, police say the alleged gunman planned and then carried out his attack targeting specific people at his former employer. The shooter, now identified as John Robert Newman.
The individual was armed with a handgun and a knife this morning. There's no indication that he used a knife on any of the victims, but shot 5 innocent people this morning and then turned the gun on himself and killed himself.
The 45-year-old gunman had recently been fired from that company.
Every time he puts something out there, he gets criticized by the media all day, every day, by everyone else. And then guess what? 2 weeks later, he's proven to be right.
Donald Trump Jr. defending his father against the media critics. This morning, the president railed against the media and defended his communication style, tweeting this. Here we go. The fake MSM, the mainstream media, is working so hard trying to get me to not use social media. They hate that I can get the honest, unfiltered message out. That's that for that one, okay? Stand by, I got more. Rich Lowry, editor, National Review and a Fox News contributor, and Pablo Manriquez, former DNC staffer and co-founder of K Street Media. Gentlemen.
Morning, Bill.
So here is the other tweet here. Put it on screen. Sorry, folks, but if I would have relied on the fake news of CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, Washington Post, New York Times, I would have had zero chance winning the White House. Look, the media had a bad weekend, Rich. He's not going to stop.
No, he'll never stop. Look, it's an incredibly powerful tool if used properly. And the problem is that very often he shot himself in the foot with his own Twitter account, especially yesterday, where on the so-called travel ban, he has an audience of one. and is probably none of his millions of followers, unless Justice Anthony Kennedy is following Donald Trump on Twitter. That's the swing vote when this thing gets to the Supreme Court. That's the voice that will matter. And Trump needs to play to him and his sensibilities, and kind of stoking this issue with provocative tweets is not going to help him win over Anthony Kennedy and win this extremely important case.
Let me come back to the travel ban, but first, Pablo, weigh in on the media issue here. Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked about it yesterday, too. I think what she said was he can reach 100 million people at one time.
That's certainly the case. Unfortunately, Donald Trump has picked a fight I don't think that he can finish. I mean, it's one thing to pick a fight with, obviously, like, you know, the sort of the Democrats or like the partisan construct within Washington, but to pick a fight with the entire media sphere is obviously not working out for him. I mean, he needs to work a lot more to create messages, because, I mean, I think that one of the things that the mainstream media is doing is starting to recognize that these aren't just tweets, they're messages from the President of the United States. These are official messages that are going to be cataloged for history to scrutinize. And right now, I mean, my big concern would be, especially with the tweets regarding the travel ban, is that they're just going to be printed out and used as billboards for ISIS recruitment abroad.
Okay, well, here is the travel ban now. Rich, here we go. That's right. We need a travel ban for certain dangerous countries, not some politically correct term that won't help us protect our people. Listening to your answer, I was going to ask you whether you think it's helping or hurting. And you said it's an audience of one that needs to be considered.
Yeah, the tweets aren't helping, because, look, if proper judicial reasoning, you don't look beyond the four corners of the policy. And this policy is justified in the black and white letter of the immigration laws. There's just no question about that. But we've seen activist judges look beyond the four corners and go to things he said during the campaign and say this makes this policy illegitimate. And you hope the Supreme Court is better than that. But very often the Supreme Court isn't better than that. So smart clients.
His son is arguing that he puts an opinion out there today and 2 weeks later he's proven right. Is that the pattern?
But this is different. This is a legal case. And smart clients listen to their lawyers and let their lawyers talk for them in court. Donald Trump needs to be a better client in this case.
Pablo, I know you think it's hurting him. Can you back it up?
Well, I mean, I agree with Secretary Rice, Condoleezza Rice, that this is a policy that is ill-considered and badly delivered. I mean, look, 19 randomly selected co-equal members of the judicial branch were queried about whether or not this travel ban or Muslim ban or restriction on the world's brown people, whatever you want to call it.
How about just failed state ban? I mean, you don't have active governments in Libya or Yemen or Somalia.
Fair. I mean, but there are a lot of failed states that aren't on that list. And there are the last time we had a terrorist attack, a terrible terrorist attack 16 years ago, most of the attackers were from Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia didn't make the list either. But like I said, 19 members of the judiciary were queried, and 16 of them came back and said it was unconstitutional. So we might as well call it the unconstitutional ban.
You're contradicting yourself. You're saying it's a Muslim ban, but doesn't include Saudi Arabia. So how's it a Muslim ban? You said potentially it's a ban on all brown people. Obviously, it does not include all countries with non-white populations. This is absurd. You guys are so hysterical and over the top on this thing. It's meant to be a 90-day temporary pause that allows better vetting procedures. And the courts ridiculously have even blocked the better vetting procedures.
All right,
no, by all means, Rich. So, by all means, Rich, this is just a shiny object that the president is pushing forward. My fellow Missourian Roy Blunt made a good point right here on Fox News this weekend about how extreme vetting and more closely vetting of people who are coming in it can be just as effective in lieu of a travel ban.
What Rich is saying is that your characterization is overly broad, Pablo. Last answer?
Right. I mean, like I said before, we need to shift our rhetoric away from Muslim ban, travel ban, and all the rest to just calling it what it is, which is just straight up unconstitutional.
No, you're calling it a Muslim ban. And now you're saying people shouldn't call it a Muslim ban. Plus, you're supporting the extreme vetting, which has been blocked by the courts. So you oppose
the President of the United States has said call it whatever you want to call it. And I'm saying we call it unconstitutional because that's what it is. And that's what the judges are finding.
You say our immigration laws are unconstitutional. The law that gives the president authority to act this way is unconstitutional.
It is unconstitutional, and it is.
We're out of time, but it will be continued. Pablo, thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Thank you as well. 10 minutes now before the hour.
Fired up. All right, U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions speaking in Atlanta right now at the National Law Enforcement Conference on human child exploitation. That organization focuses on training for investigating and prosecuting crimes against children. Of course, many hot topics out there for the AG, so we're going to monitor that and bring you any news as he makes it.
It's been over 30, maybe even 40 years.